Hello, everyone. It's been a while since I did a book review, and recently I've been really wanting to get back into reading a lot of Go books because I want to expand my knowledge. There are a few lectures, a few things that I really want to make, and I feel like I am missing a bit of the fundamental knowledge to make them really great. One of the things that I really feel like I need to work on is my knowledge and understanding of Tesuji. Though I can find and play Tesuji in my games, I don't always understand them, and that also means I can't always find them very easily. So studying a topic, of course, is going to make it a little bit easier to figure out. I did work through a couple Tesuji collections that are just problems. I did try the Get Strong at Tesuji book like 8 years ago or something like that. So I've not neglected it 100%, but it's not something I've ever really put a lot of my focus on. One of the books that I was really interested in trying out is the Survey of Basic Tesuji. I believe you can get a physical copy, but I am just reading it on the SmartGo Books app here. It is written by the same person, maybe even the same team that did the Get Strong at Tesuji book, which I remember quite fondly when I worked through like the first couple of chapters when I was seeing if I wanted to buy it. I ended up not buying it at the time, and I think I will be buying it now so I can see if it actually is as good as I remember. A lot of people really suggest that book, and so I thought this one could be a fun one to try because people are a little bit on the fence from what I've seen. This book is actually made for people who are in like the 5Q to 1Q range who are trying to push up to the 1 Dan level. And so the idea is that they're going to show you around 40 basic Tesuji that you should be using in your games or should be looking for in your games. And that if you understand these Tesuji, you should do really well in getting to the Dan level. Yeah, I do agree with this idea in theory, and so I decided this would be one of the first Tesuji books that I read. Now I'm going back into the topic. The layout is actually quite nice in that you have a description of the Tesuji that they want to teach you, an example to go along with that description, and then 3 to 12 Tesuji problems to test your understanding. Since there's around 40 Tesuji covered in the book, that made it around 100 to 200 problems. I think it was like 180, I think is what it said in the book, but I don't remember exactly. I have to double check that part. It's not that many problems, but just enough for the most part for you to get an understanding of what they're trying to show you. They say that if you work through the book the way that they suggest, which is that you read through it, don't spend too much time on the problems the first read through, like you spend 30 seconds to a minute trying to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, you just look at the answer. Then after you finish the book entirely, you go back and read it again, but trying to solve the problems instead of just looking at the answers right away. And then if you want to review again, you just go back and do it again. That is a method that I think is really useful. That exposure to information is, I think, one of the simplest ways to learn. And then testing yourself on that is always a great way to reinforce what you've learned. And they even have a follow-up book for you to check out, which is the 501 Tesuji Problems. They said if you want more to practice, you should go over to that book next because it will have these 40 Tesuji in that book and some others. You don't always know when it's going to be the Tesuji that you've learned, so it will be a really great way to practice the idea. And I really like that. I think if you work through Get Strong at Tesuji, a survey of basic Tesujis, and then the 501 Tesuji Problems, all by the same author, I believe, you should have solved over 1,000 problems and likely have a decent understanding of Tesuji. So now I've gotten through the part that I think is actually really nice about the book. The issue that I mainly have here is that the examples are very poorly done, in my opinion. Instead of going through the examples and really understanding what they were trying to teach me, sometimes I just got more confused because the examples had too much going on. They were a bit too complicated, not necessarily to understand, but to learn, which is a bit different. I think the example that they provide should be as basic as they can figure out. That also demonstrates what the purpose of the Tesuji is. And then the problems can have some easy problems, some middle-of-the-road difficulty problems, and then some harder problems to test your knowledge. Whereas some of these examples, quite a few of them, honestly, were kind of difficult and confusing, and then the problems were a little bit easier to understand. And I think that was something that worked against the book, which is one of the reasons why they are telling you to read it multiple times, because they didn't spend enough time trying to explain things in a clear and concise way. That actually brings us to the example I wanted to pull from the book, which is the inside Hane Tesuji. Which, if we look at this example here, this is the first example that they're trying to use to explain how the inside Hane works. This is a Tesuji that's covered later on in the book. I'm guessing they do expect that it is going to be a bit more of an advanced topic, so they can probably show slightly more advanced problems. I still think the example should be fairly straightforward and easy. Even in a tournament game, like 5-1 AGA tournament game, I'm not 100% certain someone would find this sequence without really having a great grasp of Tesuji. I also think that the tournament environment's the more likely place for that to show up as well, so I could actually just be wrong about that. So I'm not going to show you all the different variations. I'm just going to show you what they showed in the book and why I think this was sort of a bad example. So it is white to play at this point, and what we know is that this is the inside Hane Tesuji. So this is the first move for sure. So you have to play this inside move here. There's only one move for black. 99% of the time when someone plays this, you have to cut. You cannot allow your shape to be broken by allowing white to connect there. When I was trying to read this out, I was not sure how this inside move was going to work, so I thought maybe pushing down here, Atariing from this way, trying to use the stones in some way. I was doing it the way they were suggesting, in which I don't want to spend too much time trying to read any of these things out, and mostly just look at the answer. So I just read a couple options, and then I moved on. But the actual answer ends up being a little bit complicated, and that is that you can now Atari over the top, and you can use another Tesuji, the wedge Tesuji right here, to then capture two stones on either side. For me, when I'm looking through this, and when I was reading the book here, I'm thinking, wow, this is a great example of the wedge Tesuji, and not the inside Hane. The inside Hane is what makes this work, but the wedge is the move you need to be able to see before you can even consider this inside Hane. Now, the idea is that if they Atari on either side, we're able to capture stones. No matter which direction they go. I think I did that one already. Yeah, no matter which direction they go, we can capture something on the inside. The same with the other Atari. We can always capture something on either side, no matter what they do. So it's a really cool move, honestly. I don't remember which one I showed or not. Yeah, looks good, looks good. But it's a really cool move, honestly. It is a nice thing to see, but I feel like most of the explanation in this section was about this wedge and not really about the inside Hane. The inside Hane was instrumental to making this work, but the 15 move variation and the explanation was all about how the wedge is really cool, which I think is not really what I'm trying to see here when we're studying the inside Hane. We now move on to the very first problem in this set here. If we go all the way back to the beginning here, this one here is the very first problem that we run into. And I found that this was a significantly easier and more interesting, in my opinion, way of showing the inside Hane. Again, I'm not going to show you every variation. We're just going to go over sort of the main variation here. This one, it's a much smaller area. There's not going to be another Tesuji that you really need to understand or really need to be able to find. It's just very straightforward and simple. The idea behind this inside Hane is that after they cut, this stone here is short of liberties. That doesn't mean we capture it, but that does mean it's hard for them to use this stone effectively. So now we can make this tiger's mouth, right? If we go to capture, they're able to cut us off. We don't want to allow that. So we make this tiger's mouth to protect our cutting point. If they try to cut us off or do some sort of Atari here, this stone, this inside Hane, is reducing the liberties on this group. So no matter where they connect, we're either capturing a stone on one side or the other. And this makes it a really nice Tesuji. And so if they want to try to prevent that, they need to bump here instead to increase their liberties. And then we can do the empty triangle. The empty triangle is just to reduce liberties here. That's the most important part. The liberties are what we're focused on with S14. So white then has to go back and capture. And now we're able to Hane over the top and capture this stone again. So this is really straightforward. We don't have to find an interesting wedge in the middle of the board anywhere. We're just focused on the idea that the inside Hane is about reducing or creating liberty issues with our opponent's stones, and we can use those liberty issues to our advantage, which technically was in the other problem, but this is a more focused example where we're not focusing on the wedge, we're focusing on just the inside Hane and how the liberties affect the outcome. All they had to do in this section was use this problem as the example, explain it in that way, and then use the other problem as sort of like the final example to test your knowledge. Because we've already covered the wedge earlier in the book. This problem would be like the hardest problem in the collection, not in the collection, but in this section. and it's testing you on the idea of the inside hane and the wedge at the same time. I think that would have been perfectly acceptable. There's one last thing that I really want to talk about here when it comes to this book, and that is that I feel like they could have used more examples. Yes, of course, they do suggest going on to the 501 Tesuji Problems that they also made, but some of the more difficult Tesuji in this book only have 3 problems for you to work on, whereas a lot of the easier ones that are easy to understand even from the beginning and ones that we're probably already using in our games, those ones had like 12 problems. And I felt like the opposite was more useful in that the easy ones should have had the 3 problems and the harder ones should have had the 12 so you can really understand them. But an even better way to do that was break it down into like 6 problems, right? 2 easy ones, 2 medium difficulty ones, and 2 hard difficulty ones. You get a little bit of a test of everything, and you still want people to work through it multiple times so they can really learn all the Tesuji. Something like that would have made the book significantly better, in my opinion. Is it still useful? I really don't know. I do think that it has a good way of introducing a lot of Tesuji, a lot of information to you. I think it's not really that different from just solving a collection that has just well organized. But I do think that having an explanation of problems or examples that they talk through would be very, very useful for a lot of people. Do think the book is useful, but I don't know how useful it is, because there could be something out there that's even better. If you have a suggestion on a Tesuji book that you think is significantly better than the Survey of Basic Tesujis, or something that you consider to be your favorite, definitely let me know and I might check that one out if I'm able to buy it. This one was a little bit of a disappointment, though I still think you can get stronger from working through this book and the 501 Tesuji and the Get Strong at Tesuji. I do think if you work through it the way they say, you probably will understand a lot of these things extremely well. The only issue, like I mentioned before, is that I was more confused in a lot of the examples than I was enlightened or than I had any sort of clarity. If there's a book that does that a little bit better, then I think that would be the one that we would want to check out. So I definitely can't recommend this book unless you are just wanting more Tesuji books to work through. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoy this video. Hope you guys are having a good day and have fun.